value in the labor market. And at least those two cases I would point to as perhaps not successful stories yet, but interesting cases to look at.
I want to answer first to Ephraim's question about expanding jobs. Obviously, you don't want to have a situation where you have a game of musical chairs where you're displacing one person to put another. So the key is to work on both ends of the market. Obviously, you need to have a stimulus and generate enough demand. But I have to say also that increasing and improving the efficiency of matching actually generates incentives to create new vacancies and new jobs as well. So one can't totally disqualify that as an approach also to generate new jobs. So certainly you need to work on both sides of the market, have the people with the right skills when the jobs are actually there, but working on generating those jobs. In terms of Rafael's question on general versus specific or vocational skills, I think you need both. I mean, you can't really have somebody without the basic numeracy and literacy skills go and obtain vocational training, so you need to have both. I think a very successful effort has been taking place in California. It's called Career Academies, where they bring in employers. And again, you don't have to wait until people have already left the formal education system or until people make it to university to expose people to careers and to employers. You have to involve the employers early on, even in high school or even in junior high school, right, if possible, so that they come into the classroom and they actually teach the right skills to people, and they also start identifying the right people from the right school. So it works, it's a win-win from both ends, but it has to start early on. And I don't think you can, they're complementary, and you guys say this in your book, that actually the formal education system and formal technical skills are complementary to these vocational skills. So I don't think you can choose between one and the other. In terms of training and aging, I thought that was a very interesting question. At some point, an effort that has been pushed, for example, through TAA-CCT, which is the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program for dislocated workers, many of them who lose their jobs later in life, is to actually offer wage insurance, because at some point it may not actually pay off to try to train people that late in life, right? It's too costly relative to the benefits, right? The stream of benefits is just not long enough to pay off. So at some point, it may not be worthwhile, and you may want to think about it as an alternative, providing wage insurance, so that if people have to take a wage loss in order to take up another job, right, they're compensated in some way for that. But something that is very curious is that those older workers, even though they may have a much harder time learning technical skills, they actually have those non-cognitive and behavioral or workplace skills that are so key. So creating teams between young people and older people, right? I still feel I have a lot to learn from my parents, for example, right? Any decision I make with regards to work, right, I consult with them, because presumably they've lived a lifelong and they have a lot of good advice to provide to us. So I think there are complementarities between these non-cognitive skills and the technical skills. And so trying to train that late in life may not be worthwhile, but generating teams of people that complement each other may be a solution.
Klaus, would you mind answering the question about how do you engage the employees when they're primarily in the informal sector, and anything else you'd like to pick up?
Yeah, that's certainly one of the three issues I would like to talk about. Let me begin with this controversy whether are the right skills the most important issue, or is demand so more important, or whatever. I don't think that this is so critical, because if we deeper think into the issue, it's very difficult to empirically separate between demand factors and supply factors. For instance, of course, if you have a random shock and you have a crisis, I understand. However, let's say if there is a lack of skilled labor, and that's what is happening in many countries, even at times of recessions. In Germany, we also had, even at the recession, lack of skilled labor. This means that output cannot be produced. Yes. And this means there is not enough production, there is not much income, there's not much demand. And so it goes with lower growth. So it's typically, I mean, I've worked with business survey data for decades, or many years ago at least. And it was typically when companies are asked, they always say, yes, most of my problems are coming from lack of demand. Not of lack of other factors. So we may have a problem maybe in detecting the issues right here, I would say. So at least in the future, we predict that less and less unskilled people are needed, and we need skills. So that's certainly an issue of the future. So I think it's important that we look at the issue. I mean, I think there's no general answer to the question I'm raising here, but I think we should keep that in mind. Now, second, the issue is what do we do with the informal sector? Yes, India, for instance. Yes, I've been a number of times in India in the last years. Most of the people, 94 or 92, whatever % of all people in employment are in the informal sector. Yes, why do we care? So the others are still millions, so we can care about the millions. Yes. Now, but even if you look, if the data is right, we have for India on training, 8% of those who have a job, studies have shown, whatever the truth is here, have some kind of training, work-related training. 4% is informal and 4% is formal. Still, there is informal, but I want to say, there is training in the informal sector. Also in Africa, we know that there's a lot of informal training. The question is, how can this be stimulated and mobilized? And that's certainly difficult. But one possibility could, for instance, be that those who acquire skills in the informal sector can be volunteer to go to training centers which are established in countries and then pass a skill test, so to speak. And maybe that can be then people cannot only get a degree, but also maybe can be compensated, or the companies or the informal sector where they come from can be compensated. Maybe that's one way to come ahead. Now, the other question I would like to comment is training and aging. Yeah, that's a huge problem at least in countries like Europe or even in China and in Japan. The issue is really pressing. And there we are nowhere, I think. We are nowhere. In Germany, there is no further education after 30. Yes, and so a solution can certainly be that in a country like Germany, social partners now engage in organizing that, but that's not a general model for the world. There is so on the other hand, how much can we do? That's at least what research shows, that training in later stage of the life is actually not so effective. It has to be done in early parts of the year, the first 3 years. We know that. So one has to be very skeptical about what can be done here. Thanks.
Mona?
Answered all the questions. No, so let me comment.
New answer.
Let me comment on the informality first. So we've seen several examples where the way to enable small informal entities to take part in training is by doing this through the supply chain. So, for example, if it's automobile manufacturing, that actually, so you try to solve it at the level of the sector, thereby reducing the cost for small informal companies to participate. And so we've seen this happen in a couple of supply chains in countries across the Middle East and Asia. And so I believe that is the direction of travel, but clearly this is a huge challenge. And particularly for economies where the majority of companies, so like at the 95% level are informal and SME, it's one which bears quite a lot of thought and responsibility around how do you make sure that these parties are partaking, because that's where the youth are, that's where the workers are. But supply chain is at least one indication. On the question of, how do you think about education versus vocational? I mean, I would echo what you said in that so when you talk to employers, no one says, I want soft skills or I want hard skills, right? Essentially they want both. They want you to be anchored in a skill. But then they want you to be able to learn well, right? Because because essentially the number of jobs which one is going to hold in this generation is 2 to 3 times as what it was, let's say 3 generations ago. So you need to know something about something, but then you need to be able to evolve. And we need to have a education system that enables such skills to flourish. And I think going back to the lack of data point, one of our fundamental problems is, we don't really know what skills employers are looking for. So yes, there are many surveys, and we've done it as well, to say, okay, here's a host of hard skills and here's a host of soft skills, and to what extent are these important versus are youth competent in them? But that's done at a very, extrapolated level. If I think of you and your 70 job skills for a entry-level position, you actually need to understand it at that level to be able to then talk about how do you make it happen. And we need to also have smaller gestation periods in mind. So you can find successful programs that can make a difference over a period of 3 months, 6 months, etc. This is not about go and get a 4-year degree in some cases. So the way that we think about the role that training plays, the way we think about what are the skills that we need, that also requires a rethink. And then the final thing I will say is I recall being in a discussion where I was trying to understand what are the skills that are needed for a particular type of profession. And we then just said, well, maybe we also just need to think about what can we do with youth today given the skills that they have. Right? So what kinds of jobs can we have for youth given the skills that we have right now? And we need to think about the equation from both sides.
Great. Any remaining questions in the room? We just have 5 more minutes. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Gustavo De Marco, lead economist for social protection in MENA. We heard about the combination of soft and hard skills as a limitation for getting jobs and for not being fired, for keeping the jobs. We heard that sometimes workers are hired based on their hard skills and they are fired based on their soft skills. So if there's strong evidence of this, this means that probably not only the training programs and education programs are failing, but also the recruitment processes are failing. So my question is, first, is there really strong evidence that this is happening? And my second question is, are there experiences of working with employers not just on hearing what they expect to receive as skills from their workers, but also in terms of educating them, their HR departments, and somehow work together on improved recruitment processes? Thanks.
Anyone else? We'll take one more. Mary.
So a little bit pushing on this technology question and youth and the kinds of skills youth might have, right? The sort of stereotype is that youth are better at technology type skills. So Branka, within sort of the ManpowerGroup, from the surveys you have, are those sets of skills that there's increasing demand for young workers because they have these skills, or is there not such a trend in the data? And whether this sort of question of young people are more flexible and that's sort of a needed skill in the workplace, again, is that an advantage that youth might actually have? So that would be maybe to Mona.
Okay, I'm going to start in the reverse order, and I have one question that I'd like each of you to address. I'll make it very quick. If there was one experiment you could run, one question to which you wanted an answer, what would it be? And if you would pick up.
All in 30 seconds or less. So I guess a couple of things. First, to your question. So fundamentally, the ability to learn quickly is something that youth have at least a neurological advantage in doing. It is not necessarily the case that all youth are capable of doing that at equal pace, but the youth as a group are more capable. So if we think about what we do with that, again, I fundamentally believe that, we say that, schools need to be K through 12 and take you to a certain age. University then needs to be another 4 years and take you to this. I think that we need to think quite differently about the modules that we need in order to impart skill and in order to be able to support youth to get the appropriate skills within a time frame. Technology, I think, is a wonderful accelerator to enable youth to learn at different pace based on their own aptitude and competence and passion. And I think we see that in spades in K through 12. And I am very hopeful through things like the simulation gaming that we can actually see that for things that are of post-secondary nature. To come to, if I could run one experiment, I would love to run an experiment whereby we would take a single sector that would be of high employment for youth. So let's just say retail, just for the sake of example. And I would love to take, let's say, 5 or 6 countries. And in each of those countries, bring together the anchor companies in that sector, along with a set of education providers, and actually run through so for each of the professions that are desired, what are the skills that are needed, work backwards into, therefore, how do these education providers provide it in as effective a manner possible, heavily use simulation in order to be able to accelerate learning, and then see what happens across these countries in terms of context and in terms of pace. Because I think if we could do that, we could learn a lot about how you do things at scale in different contexts.
Klaus.
Yes. I would wanted to deal with the question is, young people are better at technology acquiring, or, young people are typically more flexible. That's what I think. They are more mobile. They move faster, and education will also foster that. So I think that young people have advantages. We have to just mobilize. That's, I think, one point I would like to make. Thanks.
Anything you want to learn from a burning question to which
well, the
you
many,
want an answer?
Simple. Of course, the question is really: is vocational training better than general training? That's certainly something we have to explore in a developing country context. That is an issue I would want to address through some experiments. I think that would be useful.
Adriana.
So on the question on non-cognitive skills and technical skills and what we know about it, I think we have a little bit of knowledge about it, including some of the stuff that Branka mentioned, the Europe study here in the US, including some of the studies of Jóvenes en Acción in Colombia and in other countries in Latin America. But we're not quite sure that that's what's driving the success of these programs, in part, right? They have this on-the-job component. They have some of these non-cognitive skills and soft skills that they teach prior to the person even entering, and that immerses them into that kind of workplace setting. But we don't know whether that's what is driving the success of those programs. So in part, that answers the question to, what would I like to do? And I like to push back on this issue of scalability, because I think actually Jóvenes en Acción in Colombia covered about 60% of the target population, which was disadvantaged youth. It covered about 50,000 young people, and it was tremendously successful. So I don't think we think that these are programs that we know about only for 100, 200 people in occasional cases, right? In Wisconsin or Europe, in New York, or in Washington State, right, that have been run occasionally. I think we actually know that some of these programs have already been scaled up and work pretty well. What we don't know is what part of those programs work. So, for example, in terms of Jóvenes en Acción, and I was so fortunate to actually be in the position of running an experiment in that case. I think there were 3 things that we think were very successful. The pay-for-performance part, the fact that we had a combination of classroom and on-the-job training, and the fact that we provided additional services. So we provided money for transportation, for childcare, for other things, kind of wraparound services, which are also so key. So not only providing non-cognitive and cognitive skills to the person, but also providing them with a setup that allows them to actually take up that training. And I think it would be very good if we could separate which of those parts were successful, right? Was it the pay-for-performance part? Was it the fact that we were providing these non-cognitive skills together with the cognitive skills? Or was it the fact that in some cases, especially for the case of, say, disadvantaged youth, where they don't have money to pay for their own transportation to make it to the training center or to the employer, right? That if you don't provide them with that, it just won't work, right? That you need those supplemental and additional services. So running an experiment where instead of doing the same thing, and we've done it in Chile, in Dominican Republic, in Colombia, right, in so many other countries already, instead of doing the same thing over again, we ran this time around, hopefully a different experiment where we can identify which part of this program made it so successful.
Miguel?
I think it's a great question, and it goes to the heart of what the book is pointing to. I think that a big part of the problem is that the education systems in the world would be expected to exit people with the right skills for the right jobs. And if so, the role of training policies would be much less challenging. There would still be a role for training, but not for remedial training, but rather for fine-tuning whatever was developed in the schooling system. So if that is the case, I would run an experiment where you provide schools, particularly secondary education and even some universities, with incentives, first with incentives and then in the future with a different financing system, where the incentive is based on the job placement, similar to the Colombian training programs. And the book, I think, mentions this issue very clearly about the lack of incentives of the formal schooling systems to generate skills for the job, which would be reflected in placing in the labor market. And this was mentioned by Mona also. So I would test whether giving these incentives to teachers, to principals, to the directors of universities or deans, and saying you will get it as long as whatever percentage of your students gets a job in whatever time. And you have 2 years to prepare for this, to search in the labor market what kind of skills are being demanded, and we'll measure your performance on that. And in the future, your budget will be subject to this particular measure.
I'd like you to see you propose that. Branka.
Okay, I don't have a rigid study that shows the fact that employers are firing for soft skills, but empirical data based on 3 to 5 million people that we put to work every year, depending on how good the year is, shows that when they call and they want to exercise the guarantee, in most cases is because of the behavior on the job rather than the job skills. Now, in terms of if I want to convince an employer to hire young people, I say, they're technology savvy, they're the most innovative, they bring their social networks with them so that you will expand your market, they are wonderful and easy to teach. So I'm really trying very hard. It doesn't always ring true with them. And we need to educate employers also, so the employers need to move from this just-in-time to strategic hiring. So if I would want to do an experiment, I would want to have, 2 groups of companies, one that would do whatever they're doing now, kind of nearsighted way of hiring and recruiting, and another one that would do this strategic hiring concept, investing in youth and investing in workers and building really and mentoring them, very important part. And then I would want the economists and people who can model to fast forward that for 5 to 10 years and to show that this group will fail. That would be awesome.
Well, great. That was fantastic 2 hours that I spent certainly on this topic. And significant part of that is due to the panelists, the quality of the discussion, and of course, the quality of the book that triggered that discussion. So let me end by thanking everyone, including you, the audience, for your good questions and for staying even beyond the hour. Thank you.